Hello, everyone. We're going to start. It is 3:30. And I have the pleasure of welcoming Chan to the stage. He's one of our staff project managers at Databricks. So I'll pass it to him.
Thank you. Hey all, I'm John on the product management side for Databricks SQL. And today we kind of wanted to walk you guys over through demos and live little tidbits for each different function over a few exciting things. But at the same time, right, as Miranda and Cyril was talking about, we're going to kind of do the presentation in the order of things you can do for ingestion, how do I govern, how do I transform, how do I discover and connect to external sources or external tools, and finally, management and administration. So you'll kind of see us go in that flow as we kind of go over the different features, different functionality, different partner integrations. And as always, everything you're going to see here is subject to change without notice, is the legal requirement I have to go through. So without further ado, let's actually jump directly into the demo. The first area I kind of wanted to cover with you all today is about ingestion and the different ways you can actually ingest data. So in this specific session, I'm going to show you a few different ways to kind of deal with data from a DB SQL perspective. The first thing you're going to see is ingesting data actually through a partner integration, through Partner Connect with Fivetran, and how that's set up, how that's kind of work. I'm not going to go through the full setup, but kind of go enough to show you guys what that looks like. Then we're going to talk about how you can ingest with streaming tables, which is now a functionality that's going to become available directly from DB SQL, and ingest incrementally from object stores, streaming sources, and make that available right within DB SQL. And finally, we're going to show a few query-federated sources, Snowflake, Postgres, et cetera, external data sources that are also connecting into it, and kind of bring all of these together in our transformation and analysis. So let's jump in. The first thing I want to point out here is before we get started with anything, what you're seeing is our workspace. And workspace is where you have all your different kind of tooling to deal with your pipelines, your data. You'll have a workspace, which is where you basically have all your, dashboards, queries from DB SQL perspective, or alerts. And then you have the data, which is basically the data exploration, which Miranda was showing you guys. And then you have the compute options, SQL-specific options. And this new integrated navigation bar you're seeing basically incorporates the various personas in DB SQL and makes them available in a single bar, so you don't have to end up switching back and forth. And all of that is permission control, by the way. If a user doesn't have access to it, they won't see the SQL section. Same with the data engineering, same with machine learning. Now that that's out of the way, let's actually start by just understanding how, for example, a streaming table could be set up right from within Databricks SQL. So let's actually open a notebook. And the first thing I actually want to point out before we even get started with it is this is actually a notebook running on DB SQL. Historically, you could not be able to attach notebooks to a data warehouse. And starting very recently now, with both serverless Pro or Classic, you'll be able to do SQL-only workbooks, notebooks, attach them, and kind of leverage them. All right. And this new notebook experience, since we're talking about it actually, also has the new unified data explorer view, which is the same exact thing you're actually seeing in the SQL editor. So it's actually having the same experience, the same favorites, same kind of, and also understanding active tables. For example, in this case, it knows that user activity is here, so it's bringing that as an active table here, and kind of makes it much easier to, in general, deal with all of this. And similarly, by the way, now we're using the same SQL editor on both the SQL editor side for your tabbed SQL editor view as well as the notebook view. Now that we got the notebook, fields out of the way, here what you're seeing is we're creating a streaming table off of user activity, which is basically all the user pings and with the user IDs. And this right now lives on S3, but this has also integration with the Unity Catalog volume. So you could basically be able to define any S3 or ADLS location, define that in UC as basically a volume here under external data. You could basically define your external storage credentials, your external locations, and make that available by just specifying that path as a streaming data set. So as you land data into that S3 location or ADLS location, we would automatically and incrementally ingest that data and make it available in this user activity table. And when someone queries, right, they'll always see the, the latest view of that. And this is done without you having to do anything once it's set up and completed. So this is one way, for example, to kind of ingest data on our side. And just remember that this was the user activity table that we created with the streaming table because we're going to use it downstream in a second. So the second thing I want to quickly show you guys is using partner integration, Partner Connect, to actually pull something from Fivetran. I'm not going to go through the full setup, but show you, the setup version. But it's basically as easy as coming here, entering your, warehouse details, your, name of the project you want to do, and the rest of the thing actually is, handled by the partner integration itself. And recently, we actually introduced a new option so that not only admins can use it, but your non-admin users can also use this Partner Connect integration for Fivetran. So it's even easier to kind of get that and integrate. And what I've done in this specific example is we basically set up Databricks as a target. In this case, I picked a simple example from Google Sheets, and we basically have an ingest pipeline running from Google Sheets into Databricks in this case, but as you know, with Fivetran or many other integration tools, this is not specific to Fivetran. You could basically just switch and use something else, such as Salesforce source or whatever source you want to ingest. But once I set this up and define my Databricks destination, basically, I can come in here and easily see, for example, this is the setup schema that Fivetran set up for this. And this is the actual ingest schema where, I can actually see the customer profile data that I actually ingested from Fivetran coming up. And as always, right, anything in UC, you can kind of make sure that the right roles have access. In this case, I created a bronze ingest staging location so that I can kind of land these. And then you see in the rest of my pipeline, I kind of take what we did with the streaming table, take what I'm going to show you guys with the query federation, and kind of do something with that in terms of transformation. And talking about federated sources, one thing, and this is not necessarily ingest, but this is kind of governance plus ingest, right? We basically, in this UC catalog, we actually have 3 external data sources already mounted. So I have a MySQL instance that basically is working, by connecting to MySQL directly. In this case, let's actually open up this, for example, external table. It has a bunch of event data. When I, for example, click sample here, it actually goes to MySQL, gets me the samples. Same with any query that would go on top of it. And similarly, right, I have data, on Postgres here. I have data from Snowflake. So what you're seeing here is this user activity, user profiles, and customer data split across a bunch of different sources. Some of them are landing on ADLS S3, being ingested by a streaming table. Some of them are already Delta, so we're going to directly join with that. And some of them, we're actually going to go live access from Snowflake or from MySQL or from somewhere, just because maybe that data hasn't been ETL'd yet, or you already have a materialized view that pulls that data that we can use. But those are kind of the different areas for ingest that we're kind of thinking about. Once I have my data sources ready and I have the necessary tables that I need for my analysis, in this case the 4 or 5 tables I just discussed, right? I can kind of, before I get started with my analysis, I can use the Data Explorer to kind of just do the discovery, which we've just done with you guys, so that you can kind of get the preview, understand the details of the data set, for example, see its lineage. In this one, for example, I have some downstream. So from MySQL, you can see who's using what. In this case, we have a materialized view and a table defined already on top of this, right? And you can also see insights, right? For example, in this case, it knows that I've been creating a bunch of materialized views and tables on top. So it tells me, hey, these are the frequent queries that are hitting this, as well as these are the frequent users that are using this. And this applies regardless if you're using a streaming table, a federated table, or a Delta table. And all of this information I showed you, by the way, is also available from a search perspective, whether it be items in the workspace, our notebook in this case, or whether it's actually the data, metadata that we're kind of looking at. So all of that will be indexed and searched, available for you to be able to search. And one nice thing to point out before we move forward here is, since this is all now part of UC, I can also just use UC permissions on all of these tables, right? I can basically come in here and say, this MySQL table, the schema should go to this, user group access, right? Hey, Snowflake's this table only have access to this table, and all of that will be centrally defined and available through the Data Explorer experience. And I'm not going to go more into query federation. There's a session after this at 4:30 if you guys want to see like how we're kind of defining these, making them available, and querying them, and a bunch more other things. All right, so so far we kind of talked about ingest. We kind of talked about the govern side. So once you have ingested, then once you have set it up in a way that your users, your engineers, your analysts can access it, the next step is thinking about transformations and making it available for more downstream users, maybe your actual business analysts. So there are 3 themes we want to talk about, from a transformation perspective. One of them is now jobs are available as something that you can schedule using Databricks SQL. So you can basically have a query that you defined in DB SQL UI, or you can have a dashboard, or you can have any other tasks being run on DB SQL as part of a workflow. So what that means is that historically we weren't able to use DB SQL native capabilities as part of your workflows. But now, in this, for example, simple example, what I'm doing is I save the query ahead of time that basically calculates revenues for some transportation route analysis in a certain fashion. And I basically inputted a filter on top of it, which I want, the filter for this New York zip code. And basically now I can run this, save it to workflow and make it run directly on a warehouse, and also using a new task type, which is basically, SQL. It could be like a type SQL, and then the task type being, it could be a query, it could be an alert, it could be a dashboard, it could be a file. So all of that is now integrated within DB SQL, so you don't have to kind of switch to, the other side of the house, come back and, go back and forth. And, with any jobs, by the way, you obviously get all the reporting, you get all the, tagging, the lineage, and all the, benefits of alerts and triggers. So I'm not gonna, spend more time on that side, but this basically gives you like a quick way to kind of deal with repeating jobs from a DB SQL perspective. Similarly, by the way, right, if you were to schedule a notebook, that would eventually, it's not happening yet, but it's going to happen as a roadmap. That will also appear as a job that you can kind of manage and centrally track without having to go back and forth. The other thing, I kind of want to switch flavors just a bit outside of workflows and actually go to partner integration. So this workspace is actually already also connected to dbt Cloud, right? So there's a very simple dbt project where I basically have a 2-step, phase where, we're in one step we're doing a filter and deduplication, and in the other step I'm doing a basic, aggregation by country, and the data is actually the same data we were looking at, right? Basically, it's a join between like a bunch of tables we talked about for doing churn analysis, and in this case, we're looking at, the channel, the source channel being the web application, some basic filter basically. And on top of that, doing a group by of like activity by country, so we can kind of understand, hey, off of the web app channel, how much traffic we're getting from each of these countries. And once I basically set this up, and setup is basically the same as what I showed you guys, you can basically come here, and do the dbt integration, and it does a bunch of setup for you automatically, so you don't have to deal with that. But it basically becomes available. You can also do it from the dbt side, by the way, dbt Cloud, that also works. And easily you can kind of go back and forth with these environments. And basically how dbt works with DB SQL is that we basically have a development stage here for testing, and these are the 2 views/tables that we talked about. In this case, this one is basically a table that has all the user activities filtered for that channel, and then aggregation on top is a dbt concept. And here you can easily see, right, whether you're using dbt to build your pipelines, whether you're using something like workflows, and later on, right, as we introduce materialized view support, and on top of the streaming tables, whether you're using our own capabilities, DB SQL offers a bunch of flexible ways to kind of deal with all of this. So one more thing before we kind of switch out of transform is, I mentioned materialized views. Let's actually build one right on top of DB SQL. So for this one, let's actually go to this materialized view one. So I kind of, took the initiative to build something a bit more realistic in this case. So what we're doing here is we're actually doing like a 6-way join. So we're basically getting, churn order details from Delta, which is something we're already ingesting into, the lake. We're getting some of the event data stats from Postgres. We're getting the user website activity from MySQL. And then we're getting regular user activity from the streaming table we just set up earlier, and joining all of that to create a materialized view. And I already ran this, So I'm not going to run it again, but basically, let's actually get a quick preview of what this looks like. Oop. Oh, there you go. And then as you can see, right now, as opposed to having to go against like a streaming table, like doing a 5-way join or like hitting Postgres or Snowflake, I can just hit query the materialized view, and it's going to give you much more performant, much more consistent way to deal with it. And materialized views are actually great, right? It basically gives you a way to schedule a refresh, schedule like a up-to-date view without having to build a pipeline or manage it separately. You can just basically do it in a single command. And there's actually also a way to add a schedule directly as part of the definition of the materialized view if you didn't want to at all deal with the job side. So makes it much easier to kind of deal with it and make the performance of any complicated transformation or join go so much faster. All right, so now that we set up, actually one thing I want to show you guys before we move forward from this materialized view is let's actually see the lineage view for this materialized view, which looks pretty cool. So I think I saved it here. Where did I put it? Okay, so let's go here, lineage. And then basically, right, we're seeing the customer profiles being ingested as a table. You're seeing these external data sources, the MySQLs of the world or like the Snowflakes here. And then you're also seeing the streaming table showing up here. And you're also seeing all the relationships kind of coming in and going out, which is pretty cool. All right. So far we talked about, ingest, govern, transform. But most of your users kind of interact with the platform as users of the platform without actually having to kind of go deep into specific like creation of like bronze or silver tables. So from the perspective of an analyst or from a data scientist or someone basically kind of consuming that data, we're also trying to make that experience much simpler. I showed you already about the integrated notebooks on top of SQL warehouses, which basically makes it so that you can use not only like the SQL editor-based working model, but also the notebook-based model. And notebooks also give a much more, simpler workflows when you have sequential workflows, which kind of makes it easy. But we've also been improving what we can do on the SQL editor as well. Let's actually show you guys a few features that we've been recently working on, both in terms of kind of, improving the experience of the end user as well as the administrator. Actually, let me open this from the workspace. All right, so if you remember, Miranda was talking about the fact that we actually launched and GA'd the live query profile, and that's something we actually wanted to show you along with the small workload management capability, which actually plays very nicely with this demo. So here, we actually have not a great query, right? We have a Cartesian join. And the reason I have a Cartesian join is because I want to show you the live query profile in action as a query runs for a long-running query. So what happens is, let's say you're working on something, you want to run it, but it's taking too long. You want to kind of understand, hey, is it still scanning? Is it like aggregating? What's happening? So what you can do is you can click on this thing here, and what you're going to see is a live view of all these stats that we were talking about kind of happening. For example, you're seeing that, hey, I scanned already 114 megabytes. Same here, I scanned this much outputted. I pruned this many partitions. So you get a live view of what's happening in your cluster, in your query. And this is very nice because you can kind of easily visualize bottlenecks, especially for like long-running big queries. You can kind of understand where it is stuck if something was happening or like why it's not progressing. So it's like a quick and easy way to kind of, understand what's happening with the query. But since this is not a great query and kind of meaningless, let's cancel this actually. And let's quickly switch gears to say, hey, how could you avoid someone running such a bad query, right? One of the ways that we could deal with that is actually using statement timeouts. And this could be something where you set a statement time at the workspace level, which I haven't done in here. And then your admins have the right to, override it. Or in this case, what you're going to see is I don't have a one at the workspace level, but I'm just going to set it for this query just to show you how it works. So it's the same exact Cartesian join query that we saw above. And then we have a set statement timeout equals 1 second as a rule. So now let's run this together. And what you're going to quickly see is that yeah, it basically gets canceled because, we passed the 1 second timeout. And you can kind of imagine how this could be applied at, the reverse, or kind of for admins versus other users, pretty easy to use. And then if you want it as an admin user to reset it, you can just literally say reset, and then you're going to be back where you started without any kind of limits on this. The other thing I kind of wanted to talk to you about is the AI assistant and how that kind of fits into the SQL editor workflow. Let's actually do a quick example and use the materialized view we actually created previously. So I'm going to switch to my workspace here. I'm going to go to the materialized view. Cool. I'm going to highlight the section I'm interested in this case. And the AI assistant is actually this little thingy here. So once you click that, it has the context of the active sheet you're working on. So, and then I actually, just so that I don't have to type this live, I kind of came up with a few things. The first thing I wanted to do is explain to me what this materialized view does. If I'm a user who doesn't know how to deal with that, basically, right? And then it takes a few seconds. And then it basically kind of goes through like what fields I'm pulling from each of them. It kind of explains, the outputting results, and then it's basically giving me, hey, it's a way to analyze user behavior and past churn patterns. One thing I could do on top of it is, let's say I want to just look at website activity post 2021. So basically some sort of filter or some sort of like additional condition on top of this. So I can literally say, hey, please update it to only include website activity starting January 2021. When I run that, it's basically going to go through this, understand which table it is actually the website activity, which is Postgres in this case, and add a filter to where we have the Postgres subquery, so that you can kind of only get activity from like past 2021. And just to double check that I did it right, I can come here. I can see that yes, it actually did a creation date, which is the right field, and we have a January 2021 filter on top of it. So you can see many kind of different like variations of using this. This is just a simple example, but it can help you explain stuff. It can help you update, or it could make it faster for you to create a query or like create something else pipeline in the first place. All right. Cool. So we've been looking at a lot of code. So maybe let's switch gears and let's look at some dashboards and kind of switch to a bit more visual mode. So for that, let's actually open up, a quick lake view dashboard that you actually saw a preview for, and go over that. So in this case, I kind of built half of this, and then we're going to build the rest of it together. And let me explain a few things here before we get started. So what you're seeing here is on the upper left-hand side, you have the user churn analysis data set, which basically is, a SQL query in this case, where I'm selecting from the, that table we created before, right? And then, you can have as many data sets here, and you can kind of use them on your canvas. And your canvas is basically where you're building the dashboard, where you're kind of adding your filters, adding your titles, doing the layouts. It's your canvas basically for kind of constructing this kind of demo. So here, right, I have like a few things already. There's a filter on the country. There's a bar chart that basically does channel. Let's maybe add a quick table here where I want to see, as I filter by country, I want to actually see the customer names and the information that they have about their churn and then usage of the product. So I basically come in here. I say create a visualization. Just drop it in like that. Come to a table. And just add my columns in this case. So let's actually do the user ID so that I can use it if I want to do later. The days since creation so that I know how old of a customer they are, and then days since last activity so that I can understand their churn behavior. And now, right, once I added that, that's as simple as doing that, by the way. As I do a filter, right, both of these dashboards are going to kind of refresh, and I did not have to touch code for any of this stuff except for the initial dataset definition, which for most people are going to be select stars anyways in the first place. And this was a very simplistic example, but you can kind of understand how this could be kind of used with multiple data sets, more than like just 2 visualizations, and kind of build it to a richer experience. And this is just getting started, by the way. So you'll see us include better parameterization, better interactivity, and more usability functionality to make this all simpler to use. A few things to call out here before we close on the dashboarding topic is there is now a lineage functionality built into the dashboards, right? So even if you have a multi-join table here, that will come here. You're going to be able to click into it. It will take you to the Data Explorer, which basically then kind of makes it super easy to understand lineage again. So as you can see, lineage is built into every layer of the stack, all the way from dashboarding to data exploration to some of these other pieces that I showed you. The other thing Miranda mentioned in the session was publish. And publish is great because it basically lets your users, you're basically like anyone in your identity provider to access these dashboards. And here what you're seeing is credentials being embedded into this dashboard. So even if a user is not on Databricks, even if they don't have the right permissions for every single table you have for your analysis, it'll work for them. They're going to be interact with it. They can do like a live analysis. The other option would be to basically kind of depend on and don't embed credentials, which is a better solution if you're just sharing it within Databricks users or people who have access to it, and kind of make all of that play nicely with each other. I'm not going to publish it for the time being. The one other thing kind of to change it is you might not always be doing your analysis within Databricks. Many of our customers use Power BI, Tableau, ThoughtSpot, God knows like many other tools to interact with us from a BI tool standpoint. And I'm not going to show you guys all of it, but today I wanted to show you a bunch of exciting integrations we're working with Power BI on to make it much easier for you to go from Databricks workspace into a Power BI workspace and kind of manage the back and forth. So for this, I'm actually going to switch to a staging location. And then, sorry, let me quickly start this. Okay, we might have to do this a bit later because I need to start my cluster here. Sorry about that. Okay, while that's happening, let's actually go maybe show you guys a few other things and then we'll come back to it. One thing I wanted to show you guys actually is how to use Python UDFs right within DB SQL. In this case, somewhat of a boring example, but we're basically defining a redact function, which basically from a JSON string removes whatever keys you want to redact. In this case, remember our events materialized view, that 5-way join. We're basically going to remove the age group and kind of make that a redacted field, because I want to make it that way, and use the UDF here to use it. But again, this is just a starter example to get you kind of thinking about what's possible. So you could be doing much more depth and much more lengthy kind of functionality here. And the beauty of this is this now function is technically acting on a materialized view that joins like external data sources, streaming tables, and delta tables. So you can imagine how you could apply any kind of UDF logic on top of Snowflake or on top of MySQL or on top of Delta. Right? It kind of makes it very flexible to bring in whatever logic you have beyond SQL right within DB SQL on top of any data source you can think of, whether that's a streaming source, a database source, or whatever. And in this case, let's actually do like a quick example of this. So this is the table before we apply the function. Right, which is basically if I were to expand this, you can see that age group is 6 here, right? And then let's kind of do the same exact thing with that column going through our UDF we just defined above. And now when you open that up, it's basically going to show you that JSON key being just appearing as redacted. All right, and then let's open this up. Yeah, age group redacted. And again, this can be any arbitrary logic, but it's a very powerful addition because now you don't have to go to a notebook to do some basic Python stuff. Cool. Talking about functions, and we kind of promised that I was going to show you guys the AI functions too. Let's do a quick example of using OpenAI and ChatGPT to kind of do some analysis with data that lives on DB SQL directly. Right. For this, let's go back to our example set. Right. Open up an example here. We're going to do 3 things here. We first need to define this function. In this case, I'm going to be defining a quick sentiment analysis. I think, right, it's basically the prompt is basically describe the sentiment of the following in one word: positive, negative, neutral. This could be anything, as you can imagine, but let's use this. Then I specify basically the specific model I want to use, the API key, as well as the API key. And in this case, I'm using the secrets functionality so that even if I were to save this query in a notebook here, I don't actually have to put my OpenAI API key as an open public thing. But let's actually go ahead and create this function. right? Now that that's done, let's do like just a quick test here, and I'm going to be testing the string. Lakehouse is the best warehouse, and hopefully that's a positive thing. It is positive. And then now I actually have loaded a bunch of tweet data from before. Let me actually show you guys the tweets themselves before we do anything else. So like need a hug, not the whole crew is upset, etc. So a bunch of different kind of ranges of sentiments here. And then we can basically go here now. And what this is going to do is for every row, it's going to make a call to OpenAI with the specifications we specified, get back the results, and do this all from the executors without you having to worry about it. It's just a built-in function and available. So in this case, let's go to the right. So upset is negative. My whole body feels itchy is negative. So as you can see, it works. And you can extend this example to many different kind of things, right? It doesn't have to be just a simple sentiment analysis. It could be kind of any kind of other instruction scenario that you can think of. All right, so we kind of covered the Python UDFs, and we also covered the AI generation examples. And by the way, you can obviously select any model that your API key has access to. This is not limited to GPT 3.5. Now that we covered these, let's actually go back to the Power BI example and show you very quickly what that looks like. So assume I'm an analyst or a report creator, and I'm basically in Databricks trying to get data, or I'm a Power BI user, I'm trying to get data into Power BI Online. Today what this workflow looks like is that first I have to not download like Power BI Desktop, do my report there, do my report creation there, and then publish it. Even if you can't do that, you're right, in the new online product, there's a bunch of options to manage data sources online. But again, that's a step where you have to take at least 10 steps before you see any data available. Whereas in this option, what I can just do is I can come to any individual table, or I can come to like a schema, right? Right-click here, right? Historically, we have the option to download in Power BI Desktop, but now we have the option to publish to Power BI Workspace. So with just clicking this, right, it basically gives me a prompt to connect to Azure AD so that my account gets the right permissions to make sure that I can actually deal with the different kind of data sets. Wait, what's happening here? Oh, there you go. Sorry, it was loading behind the scenes. Once I'm granted basically the right permissions, I select which Power BI workspace I want to publish to. I want to publish to the Data ANI Summit one. Let's actually go back here quickly and check that that workspace is empty. Yep, it's empty. And now what I can do is I can basically publish to this workspace with this compute option specified, which is, again, the Summit compute option. And when I click publish, what we're doing is we're doing a bunch of API calls behind the scenes and publishing a new data set for the Databricks AI Summit workspace under the name tpch-demo.default. And we're going to be publishing not the tables themselves, but all the relationships between them. So if you have a primary key, foreign key relationship defined, those are all also going to just go there. So you'll be able to directly access that without having to do modeling in multiple places. So now that that's done, let's actually switch here, refresh. And you can now see that this is available. And what's happening right now is it's loading the metadata on the right-hand side from the cluster, again, just to make sure everything is up to date. And I can literally just click on Create Report. I'm not going to go through the Power BI demo right now, but you can kind of imagine I can start dragging and dropping all of these dimensions and facts, and it'll just connect to my cluster I defined, push it down to Databricks SQL, and make it work without you having to go through multiple steps of modeling. And you're going to see us improve how this integration works, by the way, by supporting more capabilities, being able to add into the same data set, remove from the data set, or deal with whole catalogs at a time, as opposed to just schemas. So a bunch more stuff to come on this side. Before we close, right, I want to talk about administrators and monitoring and the whole management side for like 2 minutes, because we've been very heavy on the pipeline building and the analyst side. So as an administrator, one of the things we gave you in the last quarter is a much better monitoring experience. So I can kind of go into any of these SQL warehouses, click on the monitoring tab, and as opposed to what you used to see, which was just like a peak query count, just this thing, now you basically have a live view at the top of running queries, queued queries, how many sessions do you have, how many connections do you have, status, the cluster count, all of those kind of nicely summarized. And at the bottom, you actually have the history for this, warehouse already defined here, where you can quickly start working on it without having to go back and forth the query profile. And what you're going to hear later on too is this is going to become a system table, right? So you're going to be able to kind of look at cluster events, whether something is scaling up, scaling down, starting, stopping, error, whatever it is, from that system table as well as here, as well as all of the query history information becoming a system table as well. So between the warehouses, billing, and the monitoring pieces we talked about, you're going to be able to do a lot more analysis and depth on automatically understanding your usage, being able to alert on it, and being able to kind of leverage all of that data without having to scrape APIs, which is what we were suggesting previously to our users. Let me actually show you a very quick alert that I set up. But before we do that, let's actually quickly tell where all of these system tables lives. Now there's a new system catalog, under which you have a variety of schemas. One of them is access. This is basically your login audits. Right, you can basically see, hey, this person logged in from this browser with this IP from this location, all of those things, including JDBC or DBC logins. You have the billing table, right, which basically gives you, for each workspace, account, cluster, warehouse, how much you're being billed, how many DBs you're being billed every hour. And then, I'm not going to show these, but you have the lineage and the operational data tables, which basically gives you ways to both interactively traverse your lineage information, as well as access to operational data, which ranges from audit and billing logs. For this example, let's just use the billing table. And I actually already created a query that basically calculates daily usage of a single warehouse, which is what we use for this demo. Right? And what I'm doing here is I'm using the billing usage table, and I'm basically summarizing my DBUs for each day, and then just getting the last day, because I want to understand just what I use in the last day. And from here, what I need to just do is create an alert. And I have one already for this, which basically looks like it's as simple as setting a threshold, right? So I take usage quantity here, which was the DBUs, if you remember. And then in this case, I say, hey, if I spend more than 250 DBUs per day, alert me. And I actually already triggered an alert this morning as I was trying to build a demo, by the way. So clearly spending a lot of money on this one. But this is very flexible. You could basically do, use more than one kind of threshold to trigger something. You can take so you can send it to a webhook and take an alert on the API. So there's a bunch of options that this gives you. And as we introduce, what I haven't shown you is the statement history table for DB SQL. As we introduce that new table, you're going to be able to do things at the query level, at the dashboard level, at the BI client level, basically a much deeper level of cost attribution and usage understanding, and alerting on top of that.